Actually don't think it's as hard to leap into new geographies as everyone is thinking. If you start with the principle that all of your customers are all fundamentally motivated by the same thing, which is providing a learning journey that's going to make my kids more successful, because the parents and the teachers are the gatekeepers of those products. If your product really does solve that problem, then the only problem you have to solve is allowing your product to be seen as reflecting that particular community.
Hello and welcome to the Emerge Product Market Fit Academy series, where we're joined by leading operators and founders in edtech to share practical insights and advice for early stage founders. If you're building the future of learning and work, then this is for you. I'm Zara, and today I'm joined by our guest and Emerge venture partner, Stephen Jull. Following an early career in teaching in remote communities of Canada's far north, Stephen earned his PhD at University of Cambridge as a Commonwealth Trust Scholar, and has spent the past 2 decades delivering innovations in teaching and learning through technology at scale. He was the COO, CFO, and co-founder of GeoGebra, the world's favorite free maths tools for teaching and learning, which was acquired by BYJU in 2021. Stephen and the founding team were able to reach more than 500 million students and teachers. He's been delivering high-impact growth at the C-level for over a decade and is presently interim CEO at Epic, the world's leading digital reading platform for kids. Stephen, thanks for joining us. I'm really looking forward to diving into this one.
Hey, thanks, Zara. That was super nice intro. It's always nice to think about the long journey from teaching right through to where I am sitting now with some of the greatest people in the world starting amazing companies. So thanks for being here. And I have to say also, as a venture partner at Emerge, it's always a delight to check in with colleagues. So great to be here.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Today, we have a lineup of 3 key topics to discuss, all about mission, vision, and expansion. I'll be asking Stephen about founding an edtech company from a teaching background, the importance of mission and vision for the development of edtech products, and how founders should think about expanding to new geographies. Now, before we jump into the first topic, I would love for you to share a little more about your background in edtech and your journey as a founder with GeoGebra.
There's a short version of this and then a 30-year version of it too. So I'll try to find the balance there. I come to edtech honestly, insofar as I was a true believer in education early stage and was inspired, by what can happen through being an educator at heart and working with people closely, supporting their learning journeys, discovering new ways of learning, adapting to people's individual needs. But the first really important lessons were to adapt to the learner. And this was core to my success, I think, as both an educator, and I took it into my research, and it's really been fundamental to everything that I've ever done in edtech, is that you have to adapt and respond to individual learning needs and learning styles. And I think that's kind of at its core.
Well, you did a pretty good job of slimming down 30 years into a minute or so, but I would really love to go deeper on your experience founding an edtech company coming from this realm of academia, because a lot of the edtech founders we see come from tech, banking, consulting backgrounds, but there's also understandably a significant percentage of edtech founders who are ex-teachers, professors, researchers. Can you talk us through some of the superpowers of founders with teaching backgrounds?
So let me also just build a little bit on in answering that question. I'll just going to go back to probably one of the most successful experiences in edtech, and that was with colleagues at GeoGebra. Because GeoGebra is a mathematics platform, which you mentioned in the intro, reaches a lot of individuals around the world, and still does. It's a kind of a remarkable platform. So core to its success really was an earnestness, I think, in our kind of decision to change the world by developing something that allowed individuals to create and innovate around one of the things that I think we all find universally difficult in life, and that is mathematics. If you ask anyone what the scariest thing they experience in school, it's probably mathematics. Now, young kids don't say this, of course. Early stage learners, early years, mathematics is a joy. It's exploration. It's a whole literacy that they get involved with and are absolutely thrilled about. But there's a point in time, of course, where it becomes a barrier. And in fact, that usually comes at a point about grade year 7, where we get into complex numbers and algebra, the first introductions of algebra. And this is where I think being an educator is really critical to success in edtech. Because without that experience of being in the classroom, having seen firsthand, really viscerally understanding the difficulties of learning, in this case, mathematics, but it applies to all subjects. It's hard, I think, to really think about that idea of like, how do you make sure you're building a product that responds to the individual learning needs and doesn't make someone feel like they're not capable, right? And I think that's core to the success of every great teacher, great influencer within the space of education and supporting learning journeys, and also in every ed tech company, is that idea of, can you build a product that is inclusive, that makes people feel smarter, actually feel more confident, and supports them on that learning journey. You mentioned something about the difference between education founders, academic coming from academics and education, and say tech or say consultancies. COVID shone a really bright light on ed tech and the opportunity, and there was a huge demand. Everybody in the world started talking about ed tech, of course, and during that time, and even just post COVID, when the lockdown was starting to come, we were coming out of lockdown, and schools were starting to hint at reopening. All of us who had been in ed tech for a long time were looking at each other and saying, "There's not a single person in the world right now that doesn't now know about ed tech, or doesn't think about it, or isn't talking about it." So every family, every kid, every teacher, every politician, every decision maker now is thinking about ed tech. So this giant influx of revenue and capital, we all saw this in the venture space, of course. There was a massive investment in ed tech at the time. So that, of course, has made ed tech incredibly interesting to people outside of education, right? So what's the difference here? I'm just going to say it, Zara, like the difference is the money has followed ed tech now. As an educator at my core, I think it's amazing that everyone in the world is paying attention to ed tech now, finally, and education and the future of learning, and that it doesn't always have to be the way it has been, because there are some, of course, great things about our current system, but there are also some really great problems with our current system. It's fantastic that we're drawing attention, and it's bringing in some amazing people, like some incredible minds, right? So this is all good. This is good news for ed tech. So what's the problem then? The difference between, say, a tech founder or someone who's just coming out of tech or from, say, consultancy, historically, I think without having that kind of probably that core kernel of like purpose and value that you're trying to contribute to the world of education, if that's missing from that agenda, from that founder team, I think you can still do well in this space because it's a growing and investable space. But I think if you're going to do really well and really grow a fantastic company, then I think you need to learn from and or have people that are central to your leadership team that are coming out of education and are great innovators within the space themselves. So that there are differences, I think, both in terms of motivation, understanding of the minutiae, understanding how to respond to the complexity of what is often referred to as a market, education as a marketplace. And I'll finish on this. One thing that educators and researchers within education always flinch at is the reference to education as a marketplace. Because while you can think about it as a marketplace, yes, there is commodity, it's commodified in many ways and always has been. At its core, educators and researchers think about education, of course, as individuals. And I know that might sound a bit trite. I'm not trying to simplify it, but it's true. We're always talking fundamentally here about young people who are highly influenced by the work that we do, whether you're a teacher or a founder or working in ed tech in any capacity. And that comes with some serious responsibilities. And so referring to the space as a marketplace, or thinking about it first as a marketplace, is something that could be reflected upon, I think, by some people coming into ed tech at this point.
It's a great point about the value of this tangible experience of working with students directly, whether in a classroom setting or otherwise, but just experiencing that pain point firsthand and understanding how to help a learner, not necessarily a school student, but a learner, whilst also making them feel more capable, confident, etc. And perhaps people coming from non-education backgrounds might be missing that. And so it's super important to involve someone with that kind of experience as you build your product or service. So that's super helpful. I'd love to understand any frameworks that you found personally particularly helpful as you got into ed tech, particularly coming from a non-tech background. What helped you bring together that experience that you had and also think about productizing it?
And in ed tech, like most tech, everyone operates on some fundamental kind of like build, test, try to break it, fix it, build again model, the agile framework. And that's something that, is people are very familiar with. And that's really important that companies are thinking about this cycle. It's a cyclical loop, of course. It's fundamental to all great business, and probably, and actually indeed has been forever. Like it's been captured in some nice simple frameworks now, which is important. And those were all, of course, on my radar and my team's radar historically. I think adding to that too, because we're talking about this bridge between consultancy and tech, and you hinted on this bridge between these two, and education research founders. In the research and teaching space, there's another term that's used instead of agile, which is not something that would be used within the context of your local schools network. For example, the schools where I'm a school governor, if you go in there and say, we're going to do some agile planning, it's not something that really is front of mind, still in the school space. But if you say action research, they will respond to this. And this is something that actually syncs up quite nicely. So that's another framework I would say that is really close to what great ed tech companies are doing all the time or could be doing. And it really is, it's like agile development, but with a notion of actually applying a research component to it. So really looking at your metrics closely and going through the cyclical loop. There's one final piece to that, is that you can expand action research, which is a framework used by education and researchers worldwide, something called collaborative action research. And I think that's the next part that is really impactful for ed tech companies who are doing agile planning or agile development. If you're really focusing on your community and your community feedback and you're collaborating with them, and that you can do that in a really meaningful way, which requires a little bit of shifting some of the power decision making outside of your own company decision making to your actual user base or your community base. And I think that's quite powerful. I think how I think about some of the most successful ways of thinking about product development and responding to and growing a user community that's going to work with you and grow with you and stick around.
That's super interesting, that this idea of the transition of power from your company to this community that you're working with. Can you maybe give some examples to bring that to life?
There's a lot of companies I've worked with over the years that do this really effectively. I'll go back to GeoGebra because it's like so dear to my heart, because it's such an important company in the space of mathematics. What GeoGebra did very well early stage was to really think about, like, why was it effective? It was effective because it paid attention to its user community, like from its core. Marcus Hohenwarter he founded the concept of GeoGebra and the product, and during his PhD work way back in the day. So he actually built this kernel of this entity during a research process. And that was through, like, no one can build anything in research alone, fundamentally. You do it. You build on the ideas of others around you. And the core principle in all research domains is you're always just trying to push the boundary out a little bit, right? So there's these circles, these bubbles of incredible products and things that are happening around you. You're just trying to find the outer edge and then just step outside of that. But in order to do that, of course, you need to do that with all the work that's around you. And that's what's fantastic. So I think that's key, with bringing your community in. And I think that's where GeoGebra was very successful, is that we really we really spread that opportunity to impact the code base as well as the product, what it felt like, what it looked like, what the user experience was like. And this, like, a really specific example is when listening to user feedback around the world, whether it was an individual student or whether it was, like, say, a whole state making a special request, a feature request, what have you, or one of our commercial partners, we paid really close attention to these feature requests, and we fundamentally fell on the principle of, we'll just say yes to start with. So we said yes to pretty much to everything, notwithstanding a few things. But the answer for us was, yeah, we'll have a look and we'll see if we can do that. And then we would take it back to the team, we'd work it up, prototype something, take it back. And if we thought it was great and it seemed to resonate with that individual or that group, or that, as you said, the scale was relevant to us, it was like, if it was a good idea, and then we'd make it happen. And that really makes people feel ownership. So it's like very powerful. Now, you could say it's a powerful business position because it makes people feel invested, right? They feel like they are part of this journey of this group, this company, in this case, a product. And that's true. And you could do that by very explicitly by thinking, let's do this in order to have the end outcome of having an invested community that really feels, or you could do it because it's just really great practice. So I think even though they may seem like the same, same reason, like same outcome. I actually think if you start with let's do it in order to like build a product that's going to capture our community's imagination is slightly different and nuanced than if we do it because we want to respond to that individual learner need. And I think that's what separated GeoGebra as a company, as an organization, from many of our competitors at the time and probably still today. And that is why probably, and I think it's still safe to say, there's not a mathematics teacher in the world that doesn't know GeoGebra or hasn't used it in some capacity. And it has that level of reach because of those fundamental principles that are played out in its practice. Yeah.
I love that idea of co-ownership with these core communities. And I had one more follow-up on that. I guess that for a founder listening in, one of the big questions would be, but how do you juggle all of these feature requests coming in? Because at some point, as you grow, you'll have so many feature requests coming in, some of them conflicting from different users, that it will be really challenging to say yes to all of these requests. How did you think about managing these? And maybe how did you think about prioritizing these feature requests?
Just practically, so we had a classic kind of like backlog structure. So for all the founders out there, when people in tech, we all operate on pop it in the backlog. And when you say backlog, that sounds like a negative idea, but it's not. It's this great, big, long, wonderful list that everyone wants to get to. And everyone's just champing at the bit. Like, if only we could build those features right now. And of course, you have to prioritize. And that's to your other question. We would have a really healthy backlog, and we would obviously have to look at what were the features that we felt would have the biggest impact across our entire user community. And that's like how you do it when you're in ed tech and in any business as well too. And so again, you can apply those two things. Like, we're gonna do this because it makes good business sense, or we can do it because it responds to our community. Those are two very similar kind of outcomes, but it's like, again, this question of why are you doing it? Now, just before we go too far on this, it's not like this tack we've taken, or I've seemed to have gone down here, is like there's an earnest kind of like approach to ed tech versus a business approach to ed tech. I'm not trying to necessarily paint one over the other, although I would say, I think you can tell from my kind of intonation that I think for, again, the great, successful, really large scale ed tech companies, I'll name one outside of GeoGebra, and it's not the one that I'm currently with, of course, which is an amazing company. But say Khan Academy. Like, there's another amazing organization, right, that is doing things for very specific reasons, and that is to drive learning in a very specific direction, and that is to make it accessible worldwide, and all of those great things. And of course, it has great business sense as an organization. They're brilliant, but their core and kernel motivation comes out of supporting the learner. And I think these are great lessons. And so there's very few companies and organizations that do that really effectively. And the ones that do are really big and have a really large, loyal community of users.
I'm glad you brought that up, that kind of contrast between the business slash purpose driven approach to ed tech, and maybe the perfect version is somewhere in between the two, but focused on this question of why. As you've touched on, the very core part of building an ed tech company is this mission side. And all ed
Mm-hmm.
tech companies will talk about their mission, but I want to really jump into why you think this is important for building a sustainable and profitable business in this space. So this intersection of bringing like the business and the purpose side together. So let's talk about how the founding team's vision and mission can influence the product development and reception of edtech products. Like, why is this alignment so critical in the early stages of product creation?
The really short answer to that is that starting a company is really hard. It's not easy, but it's less difficult when it's really fun and you actually feel like you're making a difference. If you believe something, this applies to everything in life. Whether you're taking a course, whether you're moving to a new city, it's all about your starting position, right? And so if your starting position is coming back to ed tech, we're going to change the world. We really believe in what we're doing. We really believe it's important, and it's going to contribute to the greater good. It's going to make your little mark on the universe, right? Then it's that easy. It doesn't matter whether you're making money or whether you're having massive failures or investors are saying no at an early stage, or you're struggling or you're having tough moments with your co-founders. None of that all just washes out, and none of it will impede your progress. So to your question around mission and vision, I think it's important to establish those early stage, and you can do it. You should probably do it pretty literally, write them down, right? And that'll allow you to sync around one core vision and mission. But it actually has to be something you believe. Like, it has to be good enough and synced up enough that every day you put your feet on the floor, 5 a.m. or 6 a.m., whatever time, if you're an early morning person or a late night person, it's tough. You got to work long hours. And the only way to get through that is to truly believe what it is that you're doing is important for the world.
Also, from a talent acquisition side, one of the benefits that you have being a purpose-driven company, particularly in edtech, is that it's easier to attract super amazing talent when you can really talk about this mission that you genuinely deeply believe in and actually sell that mission to others that are aligned. But as you said, it's really important to be very clear and write down that mission and vision so your team can unite around that, and it gets you through those hurdles that you will inevitably encounter as a founder or as a team. Let's fast forward a bit from these early days to the growth stage when companies are looking at expanding outside of their core market for the first time. So it's a really interesting stage because you maybe have found product market fit in one market, but it's almost like you have to find it again when you test the waters in new markets. So you have a lot of experience in this area, having worked on bringing edtech products to new regions. What should founders be aware of when they first start looking at expanding to new geographies? And what strategies can they employ to ensure that their edtech product is culturally sensitive and adaptable when entering a new market?
That's, yeah, a really good question, because we see there's actually countless examples of ed tech companies and companies more broadly too. We can always, what happens in ed tech really happens in other sectors as well too, equally. But yeah, there's plenty of ed tech who've done really well in their home terrain, their home country, their home jurisdiction. And so that's something that we see often. But being able to bridge and do that same thing somewhere else is a whole nother level of difficulty, right? Your question is, so what's the magic? What's the magic that allows you to do that? GeoGebra reached every country in the world. It was able to reach the world as a company because it had zero barriers to how it thought about what we were building. And we understood implicitly the world is a really big place. It's actually also a really small place. And I actually think that from my own personal travels in ed tech, metaphorically and literally, I don't think actually people are all that different anywhere in the world. People and families and communities and kids and schools and just getting on with the day to day, whatever that day to day is like. But I think the values around education and learning are universal. You can't go anywhere in the world and you ask a parent, is education important to you, your kids? So to say yes, yeah, full stop. Doesn't matter who you speak to. So that's a given. And then you could go drill down further. Is the process of learning different? The process of education is slightly different in different parts of the world, but not really. There's somehow we've had this universal spread of a way that we impart or enable people to go down learning journeys, which is a little unfortunate in many ways, because we could get into I know we're not talking about that today, we could get into the problems like the current education system. That's a bigger problem to solve that I think EdTech is working towards. But ultimately, I actually don't think it's as hard to leap into new geographies as everyone is thinking. If you start with the principle that all of your potential user base and community or customers are all fundamentally motivated by the same thing, which is providing a learning journey that's going to make my kids more successful. Okay, so the parents are really the gatekeepers and the teachers are the gatekeepers of those products. If your product really does solve that problem, then the only problem you have to solve then is allowing your product to be seen as reflecting that particular community. What does that look like? Every user needs to see themselves, like every person who uses an edtech product needs to see themselves in the product. So what does that mean? It means that when you land on the page, or you open the app, it can't feel like you're reading a bad translation of your own language or how you think about or operate in the world wherever you happen to be sitting and living. It has to feel like home, like it has to feel like yours, and it has to feel like it was built for you and wherever you happen to be in the mountains of Argentina or what have you. If you're there, and it has to feel like this was built for me, and I feel like this reflects me. Your user community just has to see themselves in the product. And this is, I know it's glib of me to say that it's not a hard problem to solve, but I think if you start with that principle, then I think you can leap geographies pretty quickly. Another, I should add to this, and I'll close on this one, is that it's one thing to represent or allow people to see themselves represented in the product and that you're responding to their individual needs. But there is also a need to feel like in your home, territory or country or community where you are using this product, that company or that organization isn't too far away. So that you have to feel like they're close. I think the principle of feeling like both you can see yourself in the product, you feel like it's made for you in response to your needs, but also that it's not far, far away from you, like it's close enough. And that's euphemism for feeling, let's go back to Argentina. We're sitting in Argentina in the mountains somewhere that you feel like you could call someone up and or speak to someone in your home region that will talk to you about the product and give you, say, product support if it's something as simple as that, but feel like it's really part of your community. So that's really important.
So you'd say that the main reasons that founders sometimes get tripped up when it comes to expansion are not because the learner's needs are that different, not because we learn in such vastly different ways, but often because they don't recognize the importance of seeing yourself reflected in a product and also feeling that you're actually relatively close to that company, product, service,
Yeah,
in terms of, hey, I have this problem. How long is it going to take for me to actually hear back from them? Or if I need to understand a little bit more, do I feel that there's a big distance between getting
yeah.
that information from them and having maybe some form of communication?
Absolutely. That's it in a nutshell. And this is everything from both the product experience, the user experience, but also in all marketing and messaging and how you articulate what you're doing with your company and how you think about your company. And that goes without saying too. And we could name some really amazing companies that are global companies in the world. And by the way, there are none that are edtech. It's one that's to manage to bridge. There are a few others, of course, too. But the edtech has really struggled to do this globally. And it's a mystery to me as to why that hasn't happened yet successfully. We've seen some close, near efforts on this, and some of which I know we won't be talking about today, but yeah. Uh, but I think that's still a problem to be solved. And I think that's really exciting.
So it's almost like instead of needing to find product market fit again when you enter a new geography, it's like finding product marketing fit or product messaging fit. How do you communicate your product in a way that's more culturally sensitive to this new geography rather than redesigning the actual product or learning experience itself?
Yeah, I think that's a great summary, actually. And I think that comes back to something you and I have talked about before, too, which is this idea of like product market fit, of course, super important, but we've mused about people market fit. And I think that's a really interesting concept because what you've just captured there is like how people are both see themselves in the product and how the people who are building the product are representing themselves and are representing the product and the company to new geographies. So people, it always comes down to people in everything in life, as we well know. Great companies, great leadership, great relationships, all of these things that happen in the world. It's always about people interacting with other people. And let's go with people market fit on that one. So.
I have one final follow up on this topic, and I'd love to get as tactical and strategic and as specific as possible. How can founding teams effectively incorporate user feedback to refine their products during expansion, refine their maybe marketing or messaging? I would love to understand how much new customer research you need to do, be it maybe less from a product side based on what we've spoken about, but from the messaging and how people see themselves in a product when you start entering a new geography. And if you can share any examples from your experience where your user feedback significantly impacted the product direction during expansion or the way in which you presented that product to sort of a new market.
Yeah, good question. It's one of the easy things to do with when you expand into new geographies is you can always get some users, right? I've always been a great believer that if you can get one or two people using your product somewhere, then probably you can 10x that or 100x that by just responding to what is it that is interesting about our product by you who are now using it in X country. What can we do to understand how we can make that more functional for the rest of that community in let's say in learning in that region or what have you? That's a core principle. So congratulations to all those ed techs who have users outside of their core geography, because the opportunity then is to go and spend some time listening really carefully as to why those people are using your product. And sometimes it's not for the reasons you think, right? So they're using it to solve different problems. And I think that's interesting. So that's step one, right? Is pay attention to those outlier communities and then start thinking about, let's say, if you want to grow in that particular space. I'll just say LATAM right now is like a really dear to my heart place in education and ed tech because it's always been considered an emerging market or emerging space for education and ed tech, but in fact, it's actually quite innovative and leading now. And I think it's a really interesting space to be for ed tech companies to be looking at. And lessons that we learned early stage back at GeoGebra is we would see some spike in use in new locations, and that was way back in the day, and we were seeing them in certain countries. I'll now name, say, Colombia was one where we started seeing a real spike in users, whereas we'd already really established ourselves in Argentina and Brazil, some of those big geographies in Mexico, so that was already happening for us. And then all of a sudden we started seeing some use in Colombia. So why was that going on there? So it really then became a matter of a reach out. So we followed that really clear formula, which is how we thought about our community. And then as we just found the people who were using it, we talked to the schools or the government leads that were exploring this opportunity. And we started understanding the very specific needs of that region. And then coming back to something we talked about earlier in this discussion today, is that our core principle was say yes to what it is that they're looking to achieve. And we'd go away and see if we could figure it out. And sure enough, of course, you can solve any problem if you put your mind to it. And that was really our process. And with that example, Colombia was one of the fastest growing regions for us for a while, and still remains one of GeoGebra's big power user regions because of some early adopters that we really paid attention to and thought about how we can adapt the product. And that's everything from localization, certain specific supports for, say, government deployment, if that's happening, whether schools have very specific needs around what the feature set might look like. So it's all of those kinds of components. Yeah, that's how you take that sort of practical approach to geographic expansion.
So paying close attention to these outlier communities, listening to why they're using the product, what pain point it solves, and not making assumptions that their why is going to be the same as your home market. And then finally, your principle of just saying yes to whatever they're asking you and really just making it work for those early adopters, which can lead, as in your case, to rapid expansion in new markets. Thank you, Stephen. Let's move into the final part of our session, our quick fire round. I'm going to ask you a quick question. I would love for you to respond with a one-line response. You ready?
All right, let's go.
Great. What do you think are the top 3 practices that make an edtech company truly great?
We touched on a few, but let's say people, planet, profit. So the triple bottom line.
What's one thing founders who come from the tech world can learn from founders who come from teaching?
Nice. This, I think, harkens back to something we were talking about earlier, which is that education is a marketplace, learning and kids aren't. You got to think about that community out there. It's not a marketplace, it's actual people. So I think that's what tech founders could learn from the educators, is think about your user community as a learning community.
I'm going to reverse that question now and ask you, what's one thing that founders who come from academia can learn from founders who come from tech, consulting, banking backgrounds?
Academics and teachers, it's a big ship. Education is it's hard to turn, right? So you feel like sometimes you just can't. Teachers talk about they'll close the door and what happens in their classroom, they can innovate within their classroom. But yeah, turning the ship of a school or a big district can be really difficult. Consultants aren't afraid of this. Tech founders, they're ready to break stuff, right? So I think it's a nice fit when you can meet people and work with people who are ready to just go, let's break the mold, let's do something different.
Final question, which I've stolen from Lenny's podcast, such a great show. Do you have a favorite life motto, either personal or professional, that you come back to very often?
This was actually GeoGebra's motto. It was on our wall, which is, if you want to go fast, go alone. The one is, if you want to go far, go together. And I like this motto, but I think I'll just add to it by saying that I think everyone thinks that the going fast alone is not the good part, but you should go, if you want to go far, go together. So we should all just go together. I'm just going to say I think that going fast and going alone is just as important as going far and going together. So I think these two things combined together is trust yourself, but also get great friends and trust them too.
Thank you so much, Stephen. What a great note to end on. It was amazing to learn more about your journey with GeoGebra and cover the mission, vision, and expansion. Super excited to share this with other EdTech founders.
Thanks, Zara. Brilliant. Great fun speaking with you.
Thanks for listening to the Emerge Product Market Fit Academy. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it, follow our channel, and if you're feeling generous, share it with a friend.